What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the top 20 of our deep dive power rankings series. Today we're going to be previewing the 2022 Minnesota Vikings. Before we get started, a quick reminder, please do me a huge favor, take a second and hit that like button down below. It really does support this video and this series more than you know, so that like goes a long way. I really appreciate it. Also, if you're not already and you enjoy the video, make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications so you do not miss any of these deep dive team previews as we count down to the number one team in my power rankings, and you'll help me reach my goal of hitting 100,000 subscribers this year. But without further ado, let's get into the Vikings, a team that are definitely tearing some stuff up. Moving on from the Mike Zimmer regime, a lot of Vikings fans definitely ready for that. Zimmer was a stud of a head coach, but things definitely got stale. And now looking for more of a forward-thinking, modern-thinking approach to all of this that the Vikings are certainly hoping can eventually raise the ceiling of this team and get them to that ultimate goal. This is a team that's top 10, maybe even top 5 in all-time wins in the NFL, but they've never won a Super Bowl, so they want it, and they're hoping this staff is going to be the regime that can get it done. Bringing in Kevin O'Connell, a new general manager as well, in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and a busy offseason in that grouping's first approach here as we take a look. A lot of movement, both departures and additions here. So the aforementioned coaching staff going to be on the way out. Coach Mike Zimmer and Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator here. Of course, Gary Kubiak's son, I do think did a good job here, but they are going to be going with their own offensive minds here in Kevin O'Connell, coming over from the LA Rams, along with Wes Phillips, who's been under Kevin O'Connell, or at least alongside him for the last few years, was the tight ends coach there for that Super Bowl winning Rams team. And then defensively, they're going with a completely different new look defense now. A lot of times you'll change over the staff, but try to keep things the same schematically. They're not doing that here with Ed Donatel, who's totally from the 3-4 Vic Fangio tree, has been at Vic Fangio's hip pocket since like 2011. So we'll talk a lot more about the scheme and how these guys stack up against the rest of the league in just a moment, but definitely some major changes with the staff just to begin with there. And then you look at the personnel. This team definitely letting a lot of snaps out the building, but I think mostly for the better. You look at tight end, Tyler Conklin stepped in when Irv Smith went down, but you're getting Irv Smith back, so the tight end room should be improved. On the offensive line, Mason Cole stepped in on the interior of the offensive line. We just talked about how he might be starting for the Steelers this year, but they go and draft Ed Ingram in the second round. They bring in Jesse Davis, who was probably the second best offensive lineman for the Dolphins last year. You'd like to think that's a net positive on the O-line. Then you flip over to the defensive side of the ball. They're letting some veteran interior defensive linemen go. Michael Pierce, who in 2 years only played 251 snaps after the opt-out in 2020 and couldn't stay healthy last year. So not a huge loss there as far as snap count goes, but a big name guy that they decided not to bring back here. Along with Sheldon Richardson, who's turning into a journeyman at this point. But another good year as a pass rusher last year for the Vikings, 688 snaps that they'll need to fill in on the interior of the D-line, which they're hoping Harrison Phillips can step in and provide some of that coming in from Buffalo. Then you look at the edge group. Everson Griffin came back to this team, made a bit of an impact, but obviously a net positive there as they add Danielle Hunter coming back from injury, hopefully, and Zadarius Smith, superstar pass rusher for the Packers, who they're hoping can stay healthy himself. Then the linebacker group, improvement there. Nick Vigil started for this team last year, but hoping Jordan Hicks, who didn't quite stick around in Arizona's crowded young linebacking room, along with drafting Brian Asamoah in the third round. It was a bit of a reach in my opinion, but he is a third round pick, hopefully adding something to that linebacker room. And then in the secondary, 3 starters, or at least players that got starting reps last year on the way out. Mackenzie Alexander in the slot, Bashad Breeland, who they actually ended up releasing last year because he was so bad, and Xavier Woods, who is going to be starting this upcoming season for Carolina. And they're going with a combination of Chandon Sullivan, who started in the slot for the Packers, along with first and second round picks Andrew Booth and Lewis Seen. A ton of athletic upside there. So certainly a lot of turnover. I do think when you look at all of this, it is a net positive. I think a large part of that is getting guys like Irv Smith and, of course, Danielle Hunter back healthy. But even with some criticism of their approach in the draft, definitely looking at this first offseason from Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell, given his input, and pretty easy to say that the team should be better on paper, at least week one this season. But that is, of course, the goal of pretty much every team. Very few teams actually get worse on paper in the offseason. Anyway, let's talk about the coach and scheme here a little bit more before we dive into this roster. So Kevin O'Connell gets hired here, 37 years old, a fast rising coach candidate around the league. And I definitely think he earned this chance when you look at what they did with the Rams last year. Matthew Stafford comes in and they had a prolific passing game. And this, of course, is a Kyle Shanahan descendant scheme. That is where Sean McVay originates from, but McVay has certainly put his own twists and turns on it to the point that he almost has his own coaching tree. No, he definitely has his own coaching tree inside the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, because McVay and Kevin O'Connell here has been a big part of that. They've really leaned more into 3 wide receiver packages, and that allows them to be a little bit more flexible in the passing game than, say, the traditional Kyle Shanahan scheme, where it's a lot more 12 personnel, a lot more big personnel. When you look at the lack of tight end depth here for the Vikings, it is very clear that they're going to be in 11 personnel a ton. And I think in Kevin O'Connell's situation, his experience working for Jay Gruden in Washington for many years, it does help the drop back passing game, or at least it helps his understanding of the drop back passing game, more spread concepts, and provides a lot of balance to the entire playbook and scheme. So I definitely think he's qualified. I do rank him 25th coming into the year. It is tough for a first-year head coach to rank too high. I know Brian Dable and Matt Eberflus got a lot of respect. I don't think Kevin O'Connell was on those guys' level as far as how much he's proven in the league. You know, he's going to be a first-time play caller here, and he does have a lot to prove. But I have no problem with this hiring at all. And it's definitely, I guess, an approach around the league that has generated a lot of success, going with that young, ascending offensive mind out of either San Francisco or the Rams underneath McVay and Kyle Shanahan. So the expectations are definitely there for Kevin O'Connell, and I think he's got everything in front of him. And then he also brings over Wes Phillips, who was the tight ends coach for the Rams, developed guys like Gerald Everett, Tyler Higbee. And Phillips is actually about 5 years older than Kevin O'Connell and has gone a different route. He was in Dallas in the early Jason Garrett days, working as an offensive line assistant to Bill Callahan, who was the offensive coordinator. But Bill Callahan, very much known for being one of the better offensive line coaches over the last 10 years or so. So he definitely has some influence there from Callahan. Then he went and worked for Jay Gruden under Kevin O'Connell. And then he goes to the Rams, actually one more year under Sean McVay than even Kevin O'Connell had. So certainly another very qualified offensive mind, and someone that can definitely provide some input on this offensive line that's not been particularly good. But working together, these guys, I do think are going to craft a really nice, modern, wide zone style offense that I'm pretty optimistic about. Now, again, a newer group, can't rank them terribly high, but I think the passing game will be well written. 18th ranking for me in the pass game coaching. Run game, a little bit less proven from what I've seen with the Rams, but nothing concerning by any stretch of the imagination, ranking 24th. And then on the defensive side of things, they hire Ed Donatel, who has been literally at Vic Fangio's hip pocket for about 10 years, going back to all the way back to San Francisco in 2011. So he obviously knows the Vic Fangio defense maybe as much as anybody not named Vic Fangio, but now on his own for the first time in his career, going to be responsible for the play calling and above all, inspiring that not so much inspiring, but accomplishing the communication of this scheme to the players, because the Vic Fangio defense is at the heart a quarters heavy split safety defense with a lot of safety rotation and a lot of ability to disguise looks based on the safeties pre-snap, where you can then rotate into cover 3, you can rotate into cover 6, you can rotate into cover 2. But because of that, you are really putting a lot of pressure on the defenders to understand their role on the play, because their pre-snap positioning is going to change a lot, and a lot of these coverages are match coverages where you're asking them to convert into man coverage rather quickly. And it's really important that when you abandon that zone and you pick someone up, that you understand what your role is on that play and how it impacts the rest of the defenders on the field. So it's not an easy scheme to coach, but when it's working, it is beautiful. So it's all in front of Ed Donatel. He's got the experience. He knows this playbook, and I can't rank him too high coming into the year because he is unproven as a defensive coordinator. I know that was his role in Denver, but it was Vic Fangio's defense. Let's not make any mistake about it. I will say, because if you think 30 sounds low, and you can certainly make that argument, if you really look at where my grade comes in on the defensive coaching for the Vikings here, it's pretty much neck and neck with like the 21st defensive coach rank in the league. So there's definitely a cluster there, like 20 through 30, where I think they're all competent, unproven minds that surely can outperform their rankings. So I wouldn't look too much into that 30th ranking. He just happened to come in below a lot of kind of similar hires like him, but no problem at all with this hiring on defense or just all of these hires in general. I think they got some really good candidates, and I think year one is going to definitely have some optimism for these guys. But now we're going to move forward and break down this team's roster, ranking each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And for those that have followed this series, I'm listening to your feedback, and I'm going to make a couple changes with how I break down this offense as far as the format of this video goes. So instead of going through the passing game and then through the running game, where I was kind of walking myself back, repeating myself a bunch, honestly kind of wasting a lot of time and making things harder to follow, I'm just going to run through it all together. And I'm also going to show you what the pass game and the run game rank as first as we go through the position groups. So do let me know in the comments down below what you think of this format change. Does it make it easier to follow? And do you like it? Definitely let me know. Or should I go back? Just let me know. I'm definitely open to feedback. I've applied a lot of your feedback to the series already. But once we get through this roster, I'm going to do our schedule, a look at the schedule, and talk about the Vikings win total projections. And then make sure you don't go anywhere, because we have a great guest this episode. Arif Hasan of The Athletic is going to be joining us. And I already recorded that interview. It's awesome. You're not going to want to miss it. So make sure you stick around. But as I mentioned, I'm going to show you where the Vikings rank both in the passing game and in the run game. So I've got them ranking 14th in the passing game and 15th in the run game. Let's talk about why. So a big part of that is they have the 15th ranked quarterback in the league. And I think with Kirk Cousins, there's not a ton really to say. I mean, he's a good starting quarterback. He's a quarterback that you can win with, but you don't win because of. And Captain Kirk is really a great nickname for him, because he's really only going to be as good as the rest of his ship will take him, being the weaponry, the offensive line, the play calling. He's good in structure. He's accurate. He's got a strong arm. He can play on time from the pocket. And when everything around him is working, he looks pretty damn good. You know, there's plenty of weeks where Kirk Cousins looks like a top 10 quarterback, and he's certainly a lot of times underrated, because when you have a quarterback like Kirk Cousins for as long as the Vikings have had him, you do usually reach a point where your expectations go up and you end up underwhelmed. Because it is really hard to win a Super Bowl with a Kirk Cousins caliber quarterback, but it is not impossible. And the Vikings know that. They were not in some rush to get off of Kirk Cousins, and they certainly could have. The new regime could have come in and gotten a second-round pick for Kirk Cousins, or maybe a first, I don't know, and just torn this thing up. But they're going to go with more of the approach of, no, we're going to compete, and Kirk Cousins is going to help us do that. We're not going to hit rock bottom and destroy this culture. This team has accomplished a lot offensively, and getting rid of Kirk Cousins would jeopardize all of that. So they know Kirk isn't going to be here for the next 5-6 years, most likely, but under contract for the next 2, I think it's a good approach for the Vikings, honestly, because it's not like they were going to be drafting this year some prospect that you're crazy excited about. It wasn't that kind of draft. And there weren't a lot of options in free agency to provide any excitement either. So unless they were able to go trade for like Russell Wilson, there really wasn't a whole lot on the table as far as this being an option to get rid of Kirk Cousins. So he's a good quarterback that depends on the structure of everything around him being on every week. Because he's not an improviser. He's not some athletic guy that's going to extend plays outside the pocket. He doesn't have some wicked strong arm that can really open up the entire field in the passing game. But he does, as I mentioned, do everything pretty damn well in structure, on time. And as long as everything is on around him, you're gonna get a good-looking quarterback in that given week. And it sure does help to have a guy like Justin Jefferson here to make sure that at least the wide receiving room is on every given week. But before we talk about the weaponry, I do want to run through the backup quarterback situation. So Sean Mannion actually beat out third-round rookie Kellen Mond last year for the backup job. It doesn't sound like that has changed too much with the new staff taking a look at this thing. Now, training camp hasn't even really started yet, so that could very much change, but let's face it, Kellen Mond had a disappointing rookie season. He came in and didn't really grasp the playbook, clearly didn't win the backup job. When they went to their backup quarterback on the field, they went to Sean Mannion, and then they reached a point where they wanted to see what Kellen Mond could do. He came in for like 4 plays, tried to throw a pick 6, and they were like, okay, we've seen enough. So a lot of hype for Kellen Mond as a 3rd-round pick out of the SEC that was like a 4-year starter and an ultra-productive player, competed for SEC championships. Chris Sims famously ranked him like, 4th ahead of, I want to say, Trey Lance and Mac Jones, was it? Maybe ahead of Justin Fields. But yeah, that was pretty crazy considering what he looked like as a rookie, and we'll see if he can even win the QB2 job this fall. I don't think there's a huge difference, frankly, between any of these backup quarterbacks. But you might as well keep Kellen Mond, in my opinion, as your backup quarterback. And if something happens to Kirk Cousins, you recognize, all right, our season's screwed anyway. Let's just see what Kellen Mond can do. And you get an answer to, can he play? Or is he just, not a functional NFL player? So I would go with Kellen Mond as the backup. Sean Mannion is what he is. Nate Stanley, I liked him coming out, but at this point, not going to become much. So your backup room is definitely fascinating, something to keep an eye on, but nothing I see anything really coming out of, to be completely honest. I think Kellen Mond's absolute ceiling is like Marcus Mariota because he's just so robotical and doesn't really show a lot of playmaking instincts, in my opinion. But there's your quarterback room. It ranks 15th. And as I mentioned, in the weaponry, you are going to rank 14th in the league, and you have a piece in Justin Jefferson that I don't know what else to say. Like, he is probably the most valuable non-quarterback asset in the league. I think you can make a case for like Myles Garrett, Jamar Chase, just, Garrett being the younger of all the pass rushers, but man, Justin Jefferson's at worst top 3 as far as like valued assets that aren't quarterbacks. And it's because he's 23 years old. He's already clearly, to me, a top 5 wide receiver in the league. He's a do-it-all wide receiver, can play in the slot and can play outside. An incredible athlete that's produced at as high of a level as you could ask, especially given a, average quarterback situation or a non-elite quarterback situation. And he's probably only going to get better in his route running and ability to dominate across the field. So Justin Jefferson is that dude, and they're going to run their offense through him. And there's been a lot of talk this offseason about Justin Jefferson being the Cooper Kupp in this offense. Obviously, the Rams scheme coming over here, Cooper Kupp coming off just a remarkable production season and just overall incredible season. The question is, can Justin Jefferson like even take that next step and do like what Cooper Kupp did and have 2,000 receiving yards and 18 plus touchdowns? And honestly, I don't love to like buy into hype on stuff like that, but man, that doesn't feel unobtainable. Now, the one thing that complicates things is I do think Adam Thielen is actually even more equipped to play the Cooper Kupp role, if you will. So I think that might muddy some things a little bit, and I'll talk about Thielen, but that role means playing a lot from the slot, playing physical, and being kind of a glorified tight end a lot of the times where you are down blocking and you're chip blocking and doing some really nitty gritty stuff for a wide receiver. But that causes you to get lost, and you can scheme those guys open from bunch formations and play action where it looks like he's blocking and then all of a sudden he's 15 yards downfield. Like, Jefferson can do all of that from the slot, but he can do even more than Cooper Kupp. Like, I think Jefferson's a more physically talented player than Cooper Kupp with all of the potential to match that sort of production in this offense. So super high expectations for Justin Jefferson and all the praise in the world. But I do think the existence of Adam Thielen here complicates, it muddies it up from being as simple as Justin Jefferson's playing the Cooper Kupp role and he's going to get 2,000 yards receiving this year. Like, Adam Thielen is even bigger than Justin Jefferson. He's even more physical. He does lack some of that speed to dominate on the outside at 32 years old. And when you talk about play action boots and wanting a receiver to crack block down on a pass rusher or a linebacker, like, why wouldn't you have Adam Thielen do that at 32 years old and risk Justin Jefferson, hurting his collarbone or his sternum or something? Like, I think you might see a lot more Adam Thielen playing the Cooper Kupp role, at least this year, as long as he's still there, than Justin Jefferson. So they'll both do a little bit of everything, but obviously that role in the Rams offense becomes the focal point of the passing game and the first read on a lot of plays and leads to crazy amounts of production. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially as you get down the road. Adam Thielen is 32 years old, and he has not been able to really stay out there consistently over the last 3 years. He's totally trending downwards, but I do still think Adam Thielen is a stud of a wide receiver when he's out there. A big body dude with route running, and I've always said an elite ability to track the ball through traffic and concentrate at the catch point. It's Antonio Brown-esque as far as like he can just slow time down when the ball is in the air, and he's so big. Body contact doesn't disrupt him, so I don't know how much of that he's going to have left in the tank, but he is still here and probably doesn't get talked about enough, but I'm honestly counting on 10 to 12 games from Adam Thielen. That wide receiver duo is special. Beyond those two guys, it drops off pretty significantly. You've got KJ Osborne, who was kind of a mini breakout last year, especially after Thielen kind of got hurt and wasn't able to be on the field. So he showed he can produce. I like him as a third wide receiver. I think he's a capable starter, but I don't see him being too much beyond that. He's a solid athlete. He's got decent size. I don't think his hands are terrible. So he could surprise from that, but I think he's probably going to be like a career wide receiver 3 type. Maybe he proves me wrong, but that's pretty dang impressive for, what was he, a 6th round pick, 7th round pick, something like that? Definitely a day 3 pick. He's carved out a nice role here for the Vikes, so he's nice depth. I don't know if you're pumped about him as your wide receiver 2, though, if Thielen does get hurt. Behind him, it's a lot of question marks. I do think it's an interesting wide receiver room. Amir Smith-Marset definitely showed flashes last season. I wasn't the biggest Amir Smith-Marset guy, but a really nice athlete that seems to have a good head on his shoulders, and if he can continue to refine his routes and hit the jugs machine, has potential to at least be a starting caliber player. Albert Wilson is here, a slot wide receiver that when he's been on the field, he's been a productive player, but health has been a major question mark for him. Then you've got some prospect types. Jalen Naylor, a 7th round pick, good athlete, good guy with the ball in his hands out of Michigan State, and a good run blocker. So I definitely see what the the Vikings see in him, kind of similar to the Ben Skoranek pick for the Rams last year, but a better athlete. Blake Prohl, got to keep an eye on Blake Prohl, man. He was a third, fourth round grade from me. He ends up going undrafted, but to me was one of the more underrated, slept on players in last year's draft class. Unfortunately, he got injured in camp and didn't get that opportunity to prove me right, but he declared as a redshirt junior. He's got good bloodlines, kind of a do-it-all wide receiver that is not just a slot guy like his brother Austin, and I think he's going to make this team, and honestly, I think he can earn an opportunity as the wide receiver 4 on this team. I had a higher grade on Prohl than I did on Ihmir Smith-Marsette, and that sounds pretty wild, but we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, he's not guaranteed to make the team as an undrafted rookie coming off an injury, but I do like him. BC Johnson's still sticking around here. Hasn't really shown too much as a 7th round pick, I think in 2019. Dan Chizenya, I think they like his speed and his ability on special teams. I also like Tristan Jackson coming out. I actually compared him to Darius Slayton as a good vertical threat, and they bring him over from the Rams. Obviously not a lot of opportunities to go around for the LA Rams, but he did make the team as an undrafted guy, and they still like him, obviously bringing him over. So keep an eye on Tristan Jackson as well. Thomas Hennigan, another sort of interesting undrafted pickup that produced a lot at App State and has an opportunity here. It's a good spot for him to go. So no one's really proven here beyond KJ Osborne. I think this room is pretty open. Smith-Marsette will make it, but I honestly think all the way down to Thomas Hennigan, there might be 1 or 2 spots that some of these guys can surprise and make the roster, and then we'll see where they go from there. And then you get to the tight ends, and Irv Smith is definitely a lot of people's pick to be kind of a breakout player this year. A lot of people thought last year was going to be that year after they finally kind of opened the door for him, let Kyle Rudolph go, and then his season gets taken away for injury. But Irv Smith is the definition of the wide zone kind of scheme fit tight end. Very similar to Gerald Everett for the Rams, or Jonnu Smith's another good one for the Titans. Undersized tight end, but really athletic guy who can block on the move. So someone that in more of a forward moving run game might be limited in a blocking in the blocking perspective, but in an offense that's going to be running outside zone 65% of the time, you're going to really maximize his athleticism and help shelter an inability to drive block. So he fits the scheme really well. And the other part of that is because of the emphasis on play action that is set up from that outside zone, he will sneak out, and his speed, he'll peel away from linebackers and safeties. So really great scheme fit. Going to be running a lot of crossing routes, a lot of tight end screens as well. This offense has been finding lots of creative ways to get the ball into these sort of athletic tight ends' hands. And I agree. I think Irv Smith is poised for a really nice season. Now, he's been in this style of offense before. They're not so much changing the scheme too much on the offensive side of the ball, but I do think it's a staff that's going to be really innovative and look at Irv Smith as really their third receiver in this offense, and I do think he's going to be an asset for them. Behind him, it's nothing special. You've got Johnny Munt, another player that this staff liked as depth for the Rams that they're bringing in to be a tight end 2 here, so an increased role for him. A smaller guy, but he's blocked well in these sort of wide zone situations, and someone that has shown minor flashes because he is a smaller guy. He's pretty athletic for tight end sakes, and for a tight end too, I think it was a nice sneaky little signing. No crazy expectations for him, but then you got Ben Ellefson. I don't see much from him this year. Zach Davidson's definitely interesting. He was a 5th round pick last year. Totally raw prospect. Was not a surprise that he couldn't really get on the field as a rookie, but definitely the athletic upside there in Zach Davidson. And then they draft Nick Muse as well. He's more of a blocking specialist, so I wouldn't be stunned if his snap count is relatively high, but he's one of those guys that you don't really notice. Don't expect anything from him in the receiving game, but I wouldn't be stunned if 12 personnel, he's kind of their inline guy, because I do think he's probably the best blocker as an inline dude, maybe of this entire group. So he's got to make the team first as a 7th round pick. He'll probably be competing with Ellefson for that role. And then the running backs, at least from a receiving game perspective, Dalvin Cook, he's amazing as a runner, so he's not quite as good in the receiving game. He's had like a lot of times, it's just been hard for him to consistently make that elite impact as a receiving back. He's always been a really good screen guy. He'll catch like a swing route out of the backfield, but he hasn't really been unleashed as far as his route running, and he has had some drops. I definitely think he's really good as like a shot out of a cannon running back, but in the receiving game, sometimes you got to change gears a little bit more. And he hasn't always had that, but he's just so damn explosive with the ball in his hands. It's not like he's constantly dropping balls or can't separate. So he's definitely a studly weapon as a receiving threat. And then you have Alexander Mattison, just kind of a screen threat, pass protector for sure, but the athleticism in space is just limited for him. Definitely got to keep an eye on Kene and Wangu. Really got to show what he can do a little bit last year, later in the season. Was a late round pick, but one of the most absurd testing days for any running back ever from Kene and Wangu. This guy is built in a lab, and it includes top speed. So he showed some flashes last year as a kick returner in about 30 snaps as a running back. But if he's got a good head on his shoulders with that athleticism, look out for him to, not just long-term overtake Alexander Mattison as the backup here, but maybe make an impact this year in the receiving game, and maybe even beyond that, like long-term be the Dalvin Cook replacement, because Cook isn't going to be here forever, but that's years and years down the road. Kene, going into year 2, definitely someone to keep an eye on. They also draft Ty Chandler on day 3. Just a nice, smooth receiving back with good athleticism out of North Carolina. So he'll be an option for them if they want to go to him. And then they bring in Bryant Koback as well, another good athlete out of Toledo. Going to be tough for him to make it. But that rounds out a really good group of weaponry here. A lot of good groups of weapons in the league right now. So it's hard to rank too terribly high, but 14th is a very respectable ranking, and you can see it being better than that too, especially if Adam Thielen can stay healthy and play like he did as a 29-year-old wide receiver. But again, he turns 32, so I do expect you're looking at, if you're lucky, like no more than 12 games from Thielen. I do expect him to be a guy that gets banged up, especially if he plays that Cooper Kupp role where he's going to be banging as a blocker a little bit and getting hit over the middle of the field. But yeah, good group of weapons. Definitely going to be on more often than they won't for Kirk Cousins and this passing game. And excited to see these guys get schemed up by an improved offensive staff. But now I want to revisit the running backs as actual runners and talk a little bit more about the run game. So I do rank this group 4th in the league as far as running back rooms are concerned. And Dalvin Cook is for sure still a top 4 or 5 guy. I mean, when he's healthy, and you do got to note that he's had a harder time staying healthy, but hey, that applies to Christian McCaffrey. Derrick Henry now has been getting banged up, Nick Chubb, like it applies to any running back. Like it's just part of the deal. But I think there's definitely a case to be made that Dalvin Cook is the most explosive runner in the league, at least like shot out of a cannon, home run threat ability. Dalvin was 2nd in 15-plus yard runs last year, 3rd in PFF breakaway percentage, and it makes sense. If he gets a just decently blocked run up front where he can clear to the second level, he only needs 2 steps to hit top speed, and his top speed is about as good as it gets at the running back position, and force equals mass times acceleration, and he's not a small dude, so if you're just trying to arm tackle this guy, he's going to run right through that, and then he's got that home run threat ability, and that's what separates the good backs from this group of top guys. All of my top running backs in the league, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb. The difference with them is they'll take a well-blocked run, and it's a game-changing run. You're talking about a 60-yard touchdown run where no one's catching him at the next level. So Dalvin's got the whole package and that speed threat. So he ranks probably as fourth among running backs in the league for me. And that's obviously a big reason that the Vikings are able to come in at 15th as far as overall run game. But they got some nice depth behind him. You've got Alexander Mattison, who's kind of the ideal backup. Not some crazy explosive player, but there's been a lot of games, and Dalvin's probably going to miss 4 or 5 games. There's been a lot of times where they lean on Alexander Mattison as a starter, and their run game is 85, 90% of what it is. You don't get that same, game-breaking breakaway run where he'll have a 60-yard touchdown run, but his vision, his power, his acceleration is certainly solid at worst, and they love him because he does a little bit of everything. So really nice backup there. We talked a little bit about Kane when we were going through the receiving grades. I do think he has a lot to prove as a runner. Like, his tape at Iowa State was really underwhelming, and it was like a shock when he came out with that just all-time great combine. But I do think from what we saw in the 30 snaps from him last year, he definitely looked like he could channel that athleticism a little bit better at the next level than he even did at Iowa State. And he had some nice runs. He had some really nice kick returns that I think earned him those opportunities in the run game. And like I said, if he has a good head on his shoulder with his athleticism, the sky is the limit for Kene Nwangwu. Reminds me a lot of a young Raheem Mostert in a lot of ways. So there's Kene, and then Ty Chandler, I do think has a chance to be like a career third down running back type. I do really like what you see from him in the receiving game, but as far as a runner, he's just not a big dude. He's got speed, but it's not like Dalvin where he can kind of package it with the ability to run through arm tackles and burst through a hole with explosiveness. He's fine. And then I didn't watch Bryant Koback, but he did test really well, so I do think you got to keep an eye on him too. So the 4th ranked running back room. As far as the QB run multiplier, not going to be a surprise there. It's tied for last in the league. Not getting a whole lot of running ability from Kirk Cousins. He's actually a remarkably awkward, unathletic looking runner, so not getting a whole lot there. He is good on play action boots, though. It is worth noting. And then let's talk about the offensive line. So for pass blocking, it's not a great unit. They rank 25th, but this is a much better unit from a run block perspective, and some of that is helped by the skill blockers here that are pretty damn good. But let's start with the O-line. So at left tackle, you have Christian Darrisaw, who has pretty major expectations in year 2, and I think that's totally justified. Loved him as a prospect. I thought if they didn't even trade down in that draft from like 14 or 13 or wherever they were and just took Darrisaw, it would have been like an A pick, especially given their need at left tackle. So it hurts a little bit less knowing that the 2 players that they got with those 3rd round picks, Kellen Mond and Wyatt Davis, aren't really doing anything for them, knowing that, well, you still got the guy that you probably should have taken anyway. So that's irrelevant at this point in time, but always fun to look back on the draft. Either way, Christian Darrisaw is a super high upside player. Missed the first couple months of last season, and that included his ability to kind of compete and learn the offense in training camp on the field. So you kind of knew when that injury crept up early on in the preseason that it was just going to be a little bit of a slow start for him. It's just tough for any rookie to hit the ground running when you miss so much time. Your offseason's already shortened with the draft. So he does eventually get on the field, and his first couple starts were definitely rocky, but he really started to settle in the last, 4-6 weeks of the season as a pass protector. Now his run blocking, it was there from the get-go, and that was no surprise. I mean, this dude had incredible college highlights, great athlete, played in a wide zone blocking scheme at Virginia Tech, and that was really never a question. It was just how much is he going to improve that technique as a pass protector, and if he does, he's got franchise left tackle, top 10 left tackle potential, whatever you want to call it. The expectation is he starts to, or I would just say continues to improve and starts approaching that territory. He's got a ways to go, and I think he's still going to have his lumps this season, but he's a hell of a prospect, and I'm really not worried about him. I think, I grade him as a 70 pass protector right now, but by season's end, I think the expectations, get some more reps, 75, 76, become more of a solid starter, and then heading into year 3, maybe he can become a top 10 left tackle. But definitely high expectations with some anticipated learning curves still from Christian Darrisaw. And then at left guard, Ezra Cleveland, who I think is still getting better. He converted from tackle to guard, a second-round pick out of Boise State. I thought was going to be their kind of left tackle of the future with some development opposite of Brian O'Neill, but they are lucky enough to get Christian Darrisaw. So instead of wasting the asset, they see what he can do at guard. And it's definitely been a bit of a conversion for him. I think as far as his technique, it's not an immediate conversion into the inside, but also his strength and anchor was never really his game at tackles. So there has been a lot of times where he's struggled in pass protection, but at the same time, a really special athlete that I do think his game translated in this wide zone blocking scheme, where he's been a pretty dang good run blocker. So I think at least in that area, you're going to end up with a really good run blocker in Ezra Cleveland by year's end with continued development. And if he really works at his technique and his strength a little bit, he can become just a solid pass protector, if not more than that, and become, just a really good guard. Maybe beyond that, but he's kind of a partial liability in pass protection and someone you feel pretty good about, holding that leverage point from the guard spot on these wide zone blocks. Then you get Garrett Bradbury at center. An interesting conversation. He kind of got partially benched last year to Mason Cole, and Cole outplayed him, which was definitely embarrassing for Bradbury. And this is a huge year for him. I'm actually pretty optimistic that he's going to get better. I like Garrett Bradbury. I think he's a remarkable athlete. He's shown a lot of high-end play as a run blocker, but it's not always consistent. And as a pass protector, he was one of the bigger liabilities of any offensive lineman in the entire league last year. And for a guy that has had to go against Akeem Hicks twice every year and has had to go against Kenny Clark twice a year, like those big, massive defensive tackles just overwhelm Garrett Bradbury. And that's, I think, always going to be a concern for him in his game. But if you give him help against the bigger guys and he can just improve that technique and his anchor and pass pro, I still think he can be a pretty good center, especially with him maybe evolving to becoming like a great run blocker as opposed to just a good athlete with some impact highlight blocks. But yeah, a huge year for him. I think they're fully equipped to give him another year at center, but this could go the other way as well, and he could end up getting benched. I don't know who their backup center would be in that situation, but it's not been pretty for Garrett Bradbury, but I still kind of believe in him. But week 1 against Kenny Clark, don't expect great pass protection one-on-one from their center. Then you get right guard being a total competition right now. To spoil a little bit of our conversation with Arif coming up, he's got Jesse Davis slated to be their starting right guard. Now, they drafted Ed Ingram in the second round, so he's going to be knocking on the door. But Jesse Davis is a professional. He was the second best offensive lineman on his team last year, and that's not saying much because it was the Miami Dolphins, but that's something to put on the resume. I think they look at him as a guy that can plug in at right guard, and with 3 guys that you're kind of really hoping can develop in Bradbury, Cleveland, and Darrisaw, to at least kind of know what you're getting there might be what they want to do for week 1 with Jesse Davis there at right guard. But like I said, you're going to have Ed Ingram knocking on the door, and I'll talk about him briefly, but let's round out the starters here with Brian O'Neill at right tackle. Man alive, it is good to have Brian O'Neill here, who you just don't have to worry about. I mean, he's a rock at right tackle. He's got the foot speed to handle speed and bend around the edge, and he's got really good grip strength. He's improved his anchor. He's beefed up, and he now handles power really well. He might even still be getting better, but he's one of the top paid right tackles in the NFL for a reason, and you feel pretty good about him in run block too, because he is a great athlete, a former tight end, and it's no coincidence that once they went to a wide zone blocking scheme, he kind of took off because he's really natural and he's really long on the move to seal off that edge. So it is certainly nice when you have some question marks and some guys that got to develop here to have an anchor at right tackle that you can count on. Now, as far as the depth is concerned, I think you got to talk about Ed Ingram next because he's going to be competing at right guard, and he definitely has a chance. Now, I had a 3rd to a 4th round grade on Ed Ingram before off-field concerns popped up, and I'm not going to get too much into his off-field stuff. They're clearly comfortable enough with him to spend a 2nd round pick, but just his play on the field, I thought his pass protection was in general kind of a mess. I liked his athleticism, but he didn't always latch on or play with the leverage he needed to. So, I don't know. A 2nd round pick was definitely rich, and I don't see it as some guarantee that he wins the right guard spot. He's going to have an opportunity to compete there, and I wouldn't be stunned. But I do think Jesse Davis is a better player right now, and Ed Ingram's just going to have to develop a lot of that technique. Now, I also put the eye emoji next to Chris Reed because Chris Reed was pretty solid for the Colts last year. Now, he had a lot of talent around him to help him play well, but guy from Minnesota State coming back to Minnesota here with a wide open right guard opportunity. He's not getting every chance to win this job straight up, but if Jesse Davis struggles and they don't think Ed Ingram's ready yet, do they turn to a Chris Reed at right guard, who I think if he is what he showed last year might be their best option at right guard. So I did like that signing, sneaky signing, probably grew up a Vikings fan, so it's a dream opportunity for him. And then you got Wyatt Davis as well, 3rd round pick last year, but every single report is that he just cannot impress a coach for the life of him. And he's got all the athletic tools. He's a really good run blocker, at least one-on-one. But I was never a huge Wyatt Davis fan coming out of Ohio State, a guy that at one point in time was like the best guard in the class by the consensus board and, was supposed to be a 1st round pick and all this stuff. But when I got to his film, I was definitely underwhelmed. And what really bothered me was how bad he was in blitz pickup. Genuinely one of the worst guards I've ever seen at recognizing stunts and getting over to blitzing linebackers and all this stuff. I was just oblivious if it wasn't blocking the guy that was head up in front of him. That applied to his, 2nd level instincts as well. So just maybe something missing there. Hopefully something clicks for him because he is an athletically talented guy, a 3rd round pick, but not very high expectations for Wyatt Davis this year. And then you go to the tackle depth. You got Oli Udoh, who started every game at right guard, but he's getting moved back to tackle, and he's going to be kind of their swing tackle, if you will. And he might be an option to come in there at guard again, as he played there last year, but was a pretty solid run blocker. He's just such a good athlete and so much raw strength there that he held up. But the pass protection was ugly at guard, and I don't expect it to be too much better at tackle, so I don't feel great about him as your swingman. Vidarian Lowe kind of looks the part, but he's one of these linemen that to me looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane a little bit. 6th round pick, though, with some athletic upside. We'll see what comes of it. That's really the only other offensive lineman worth noting. I think that's probably your group of 10 right there. I don't see the other guys even making it. So, again, 25th for pass blocking. Just, you've got a replacement level dude there at right guard, and then a bunch of guys from center to left tackle that just need to improve. Young guys that need to get better. So, I do think they'll have their lumps here in the first year of the Kevin O'Connell regime. Much better in run blocking, though. All 3 of those question marks that we've mentioned are actually really good run blockers. So you've got that helping out. And then you also get a little bit of a boost from, to me, one of the better group of skill blocking dudes in the league. You got CJ Ham, who's one of the better fullbacks in the league. Irv Smith, I think, is a functional blocker in this wide zone blocking scheme. Same with Johnny Munt, who showed that for the Rams. Not listed here is Nick Muse as well, if he makes the team, was a good blocker at South Carolina. And then both these wide receivers, Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, really good run blockers. So they're definitely going to play physical and help seal that edge for Dalvin Cook, which especially in a wide zone blocking scheme, it is really important. And that rounds up our offensive preview here. Again, ranking 14th in the passing game, being perhaps limited by a Kirk Cousins at quarterback and hurt by a pass blocking unit that I do think has some lumps this year, along with an offensive coaching staff that does need to prove itself. And then 15th in the run game, where I think they'll be very effective. They'll definitely have those explosive runs and probably some weeks where, they're leading the league in rushing yards that week. But inconsistency with the overall run blocking, ranking 15th, which is not bad. Some questions about the new coaching staff as well. And you end up with the 15th ranked run game, which is certainly not a problem there. So 17th for overall offense. But let's talk about this defense. An interesting group for sure. And I think the Vikings, especially on the defensive side of the ball, they are the most high variance unit dependent on health. Because as you look at this thing here, your two top edge rushers are two of your best defensive players. One of the better edge rushing duos in the league here with Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter, but both guys that have major injury questions. I didn't put the Red Cross next to guys like Eric Kendrick, Harrison Smith, Jordan Hicks, and Patrick Peterson, because they have been able to stay relatively healthy, but all guys that have been banged out throughout their career or guys getting older. I can definitely see a world where you just aren't able to get all these starters out there and put this all together. It is a concern for me, worth noting above pretty much any team that we've previewed so far. This is a team very much rolling the dice with some injury-prone players. And I do factor that into some of these grades. But let's start with that pass rush. Despite the injury questions, they still rank in the top 10 for me. I mean, there's no reason Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter can't be the best pass rushing edge duo in the league, behind probably Bosa and Khalil Mack. The upside here is just terrifying, honestly. I mean, two just ruthless pass rushers, two guys that do it a little bit differently. So you got Danielle Hunter. I mentioned health questions for him. He missed the majority of last season and the year before that. Major back weird question marks as far as just the spine, and it's just a weird part of the body to get injured, and they don't want to play around with it. If he starts to feel sore in his back, they're going to take him out for a long extended period of time where he's listed as questionable all season and never really sees the field, just as we've kind of seen. And that exact injury applies to Zadarius Smith, by the way, so I don't need to repeat the worries there. But man, when he's out there, he's one of the most productive pass rushers in the league. He's one of the most physically intimidating pass rushers in the league. He's listed at, I think, 6'5", but when you watch him on tape, he looks even taller than that. Just the length and arm strength packaged with a nice get-off and some nice bend that he's able to win with. It is unfortunate that he got hurt, because I think Danielle Hunter was on track to entering that conversation for the best edge rusher in the league. And when he's been out there, his pressure rate has been up there with the best of them. So if he's there, you're getting a borderline elite pass rusher, hoping he can get back to full speed. And if you can get him and his health issues to stabilize to the point where you're not worried about it, maybe we can get back to a point where Danielle Hunter is one of the premium assets in the league, and he can get that contract extension that he's been looking for. But with his injury record, he just hasn't had any leverage. So definitely some question marks as far as health with him. Same thing applies to Zadarius Smith. Missed all last year with a weird back injury deal, played the first couple games. Ended up signing with Baltimore, and the contract kind of got pulled. And usually when that happens, it's a physical thing. So we don't really know what the state of his injury is and what, how many games he's going to play and what percent of himself he's going to be when he's out there. So you do have to take him with some variance here, but he's another guy that over the last 2 years, when he's been on the field, he's actually been the most productive pass rusher in the league on a pressure basis. And a big part of that, not just because he's super talented and strong and quick, but he's also used in a really creative way in Green Bay. And this is going to be a very similar defensive scheme here. And I expect them to use him as a blitz linebacker to wrap him inside and get him as a mismatch advantage on guards where he's too quick and too strong for a guard more often than not. But seriously, the sky is the limit for this duo. It's just a matter of health and can they get through the season? And if they do, I think this defense is going to be dramatically elevated, especially on the back end with this coverage unit that has some young players. But if they can't, you have a severe lack of depth. You've got DJ Wanham, who had a million opportunities last year to break out. He had like over 500 pass rush snaps and was just kind of is what he is. He's an adequate backup, and I don't see him taking a big step beyond that. He's got some tools, but I think he's kind of maxed out at this point. Then you got some kind of developmental guys that were mid-round picks last year that couldn't get on the field, in large part due to health. So Patrick Jones out of Pitt, Janarius Robinson, kind of lumped those guys together as unproven wait-and-see year for those two guys. I got to put the eyes here next to Andre Mintz, was one of my favorite undrafted rookies of the last few years. Someone that I did have a draftable grade on because I thought his get-off and bend was truly special for especially kind of where you were able to get him. And in a 3-4 system like this, with not a whole lot of guys in front of them, sometimes these guys just need an opportunity. And I would love to see Andre Mintz maybe beat out Patrick Jones, beat out Janarius Robinson, and start to get an opportunity to show what he can do. So keep an eye on Andre Mintz if he can make it. And I think he does, because you've got some undrafted free agents, Zach McLeod, Luigi Villain, which I'm definitely not saying that last name right, but I'm saying Luigi Villain because that's an all-name team type of deal. But needless to say, the edge depth sucks. And if Hunter and Smith can't stay healthy, which you say that about a lot of guys, but it especially applies to that duo right there, this could drop from the 10th best pass rush to the 22nd or 30th or 32nd best pass rush pretty damn quickly and pretty damn easily. So it is a legitimate concern for this Vikings team, and it's kind of tough to know what to do with. But then you look inside, and it's a little bit more stable. You've got Dalvin Tomlinson, who's just a really good all-around defensive tackle, a little bit better as a run defender. As a rusher, he can have some nice little sidestepping quick moves. He definitely will win with power. He's not some overly consistent, dominant pass rusher by any stretch of the imagination. But you could do a lot worse for your DT1, and a lot of teams do a lot worse. And then Armon Watts actually played pretty well last year. He's not the most powerful guy or the quickest guy, but he does really get after it as a rusher, and I do like his first step quite a lot. So I'm not going to say he can't get better. I just don't know if I'm fully expecting it. But I do think he's going to get more pass rush snaps than Harrison Phillips, who they paid a lot of money here. Though I do think it's going to be quite a bit of a rotation. And Harrison Phillips is no slouch getting after the rusher either, but he doesn't have the quickness in the first step that Armon Watts has, even if he is a little bit more powerful. Watts has just been a little bit more productive than Harrison Phillips. I think they like Armon Watts, or at least this new staff will like him. And then it'll buy both these guys an opportunity to stay fresh and healthy and to do what they do best. Behind Harrison Phillips, you have James Lynch, who was kind of a college edge hybrid type at Baylor's weird 3-3-5 defense, making the full-on conversion to interior defensive line in the NFL. Started to make some splash plays last year. And as a fourth guy, he's someone to keep an eye on, I suppose. Jalen Twyman, who had kind of a lost rookie season because he actually got shot as like an innocent bystander. Just a crazy story. But someone coming out of Pitt with a lot of quickness and a lot of pass rush moves, but an undersized guy without a lot of power. Would be curious to see with some more opportunities what he can do. They drafted Sezi Otomeo out of Minnesota, hometown guy. Really powerful run defender as an edge player, but I do think they'll see him as more of that 3-4 defensive end type, so maybe more of a base run defender. I don't know how much we'll see from him as a pass rusher. And then they've got some veterans just to kind of hold down the competition. Jonathan Bullard, Ty McGill. If they don't like what they see from Lynch and Jalen Twyman, you're probably going to more of the veteran guys there, but nothing special. So the depth in general for a pass rush, it's just not good, especially in that edge group. But then we get to the back end and the coverage unit. So for linebacker coverage, they rank second in the league. And how can you not love what Eric Kendricks does in coverage? Every year he's towards the top of the leagues and pass breakups and interceptions and PFF coverage grade for whatever it's worth, but it does show on tape, man. He is the definition of cover players, not grass, in zone coverage. And in this defense, it's going to be no different. Like, he is so good at understanding his assignment on the play and breaking down route combinations to the point where he'll recognize what's coming either in front of him or behind him, and he'll just go cover a dude. And he does it in a way that a lot of linebackers can't do. He does it without jeopardizing the middle of the field. Like if he feels like he needs to hang in there and process a little bit longer so he doesn't completely leave the middle of the field open, he won't go. But if he knows, I got to cover this crossing route, there's nothing else coming into my zone, he'll go take that play away. So his IQ and coverage is at the top of the league, maybe the best. And he's a smaller guy. He doesn't have like this crazy Spider-Man-esque web type of reach to break up balls and get in passing lanes and all that stuff. But he's pretty quick. He's pretty fast. And paired with his IQ, he's a dominant cover linebacker. Another guy that has been banged up every single year. You almost expect him to miss about a month of football. So again, I do think you got to note that. They signed Jordan Hicks, who's been able to stay healthy for the Cardinals, but was always getting hurt for the Eagles. But anyway, as a player, really nice cover linebacker. Maybe even underrated in a lot of ways. But I think he is a risk taker in coverage, but he, unlike Eric Kendricks, doesn't always do it with patience. So I will just say that. He is a good athlete in general, can go man coverage. And he's just a good cover linebacker. I like that signing. And then they draft Brian Asamoah. I can't believe they took him when they did. Early third round, ahead of a Nakobe Dean, ahead of Leo Chanel. Really a surprising draft pick, honestly. One of my least favorite picks of the draft for any team. I see him as a weak side backer, maybe a dime backer in a couple years if he can really improve his coverage instincts, and a special teamer. But the linebackers they passed on to take him, I just don't agree with. Now, he's got a great mentor there in Eric Kendricks, and you hope he can develop. He's got a lot of athletic traits. He's kind of a lanky guy. He's a good tackler in space, so definitely some upside there. I guess I won't be stunned if he turns into a good player, but wouldn't have been my pick. We'll see what he can do. They also have Blake Lynch, who I wouldn't pencil in Brian Asamoah as the de facto backup linebacker, because Blake Lynch, an undrafted guy with some good athleticism, some good length and coverage feel, has shown some flashes in minimal opportunities when you've gotten injuries to an Eric Kendricks. You've got Troy Dye, who has similar traits out of Oregon. So it is a pretty deep group there. So if and when Kendricks and Jordan Hicks do get hurt, you've got some interesting young pieces to experiment with and see what you have for the future. We've even got Chaz Surratt there, who was a third-round pick several years ago, but he's had a hard time kind of climbing up this depth chart. Not a great athlete, but a former quarterback who I did like his coverage feel. Let's not write him off quite yet. They'll probably go with those 6. Connolly hasn't been able to stay healthy, and don't really know anything about Will Wainu. Am I saying that right? Maybe a practice squatter there. But yeah, second in the league in linebacker coverage. Obviously very optimistic about this defense's ability to take away the middle of the field, but not quite as optimistic about this secondary. I do think it's an interesting secondary, and they have certainly elements of upside here, but your outside corners, probably going to be Patrick Peterson and Cam Dantzler, at least as the day one starters. Now, definitely not penciled in. Andrew Booth was early second round pick, and they're going to give an opportunity to, maybe win a outside job, or maybe compete in the slot, or maybe they play around with Peterson playing slot and Booth and Dantzler outside, or some combination of that. But I do expect what you're seeing here with Dantzler, Peterson, and Sullivan in the slot to be their week one starting secondary, maybe with Booth as the season goes on, earning more and more playing time. Could very well, Booth could very well surprise and be a day one starter. He certainly has the potential for it. But I'm expecting Dantzler and Pat Pete, it's just an adequate group of corners. I think Pat Pete could even be better this year in a really zone-heavy system now with the Fangio defense, where he can really lean on his experience and IQ. Now, he's never been like the best zone corner, but you got to think at his age, losing some of that athleticism, you're just forced to see the game in a different way. So it sounds weird to say, but if he had a breakout year at his age as a zone corner, I love Pat Pete. So I don't think it happens, but maybe. And then Cam Dantzler has played good football was he a third round pick? someone that was kind of a fan favorite in the draft, tanked his stock with a bad 40 time, but has played a lot faster than a 4.6 or whatever he ran, and has had a pretty solid start to his career for a young corner. It's not an easy position to play, and he's been put into a tough spot on a pretty bad defense. So I like to think that he's got a starting job to lose, and he can at least hang around here as a CB2 who's got length and a really physical, tough dude, getting better every year. I like Cam Dantzler. I don't think he's a burner. I do think he's really slender and can actually get bodied down the field sometimes, despite being such a long player. But yeah, I think he will get starting reps this year, just as he did last year. And then at slot, they signed Shannon Sullivan, and they gave him, pretty solid money to at least come in and be the day one starter in the slot. This is the same defense he was familiar with in Green Bay, but Green Bay couldn't wait to upgrade in the slot there. Like, he is a undrafted dude that fought his way up the depth chart, had a couple nice games, and then there was no one else to really take that job back. Like, he just is not an athlete. He's small, he's slow, and he can't really hang in match coverage. He's decent in zone, decent IQ, like physical run defender. There's things to like about him. He's had a really nice career for an undrafted player. But if you're a Vikings fan, you're definitely hoping that you can get some better combination here with these corners that, to me, might include Patrick Peterson moving into the slot and Andrew Booth playing outside. That's another kind of interesting pathway for Patrick Peterson, who has not really played a whole lot of slot corner, but he's big, he's physical, he's still pretty quick for a bigger guy. And we've seen corners slide inside late in their career and make the most of it. So wouldn't be stunned if that made sense for Patrick Peterson. And that would open the door for Andrew Booth to get the start. So Andrew Booth was definitely a first-round cornerback prospect. Problem is, there were some injury concerns that a lot of people like myself and basically any draft analyst without the inside information and the medicals wouldn't have known that he's got some issues as far as his long-term projection with his health. So they take a little bit of a risk with him falling, but man, he's got speed. He's got the development track you look for. He's got length. Really good fit for one of these zone defenses, can really work up and down the sideline. I loved his zone instincts at Clemson. It was in man coverage where I thought his kind of foot technique and just his movement, like he's a little bit high-hipped. I thought in true man coverage, running across the field, it wasn't really his game. But working up and down the sideline and cover 4 and cover 3, really like what he's going to be able to do if he can stay healthy and get out there. So I do think as the season goes on, we see more and more of him. I just don't know if it's going to be week 1. Kind of actually reminds me a lot of what, Eric Stokes was coming out of Georgia. And Stokes similarly wasn't a day one starter for the Packers. So, but in the same defense, got better as the year went on and is looking up. So I like the pick of Andrew Booth, probably my favorite player that they took. They also take a Caleb Evans, who's kind of a poor man's Andrew Booth, a guy whose top speed's really impressive. He's a playmaker in zone coverage, 4th round pick with a ton of athletic ability. Is a little bit high-hipped as well, and definitely more of a zone fit than someone I want running man coverage all over the field. But for a 4th round pick, he definitely has the traits you want to gamble on, so I like that selection. Then I think you kind of got an open competition for the CB6 spot. Perry Nickerson's a good special teamer because he's one of the faster players in the NFL. Just no lick of coverage ability. Chris Boyd, Harrison Hand, Nate Hairston, they've kind of been around here. They'll be competing, but not a whole lot worth mentioning. And then you get to the safeties. So you have Harrison Smith, who's still in another really good year last year, even though he's on the back 9 and he's not on the 11th or 12th hole. I'll just say that. I do think he's slowing down a little bit, but a slowed down Harrison Smith is still a really athletic safety. So he's no slouch back there. And now in a quarters heavy defense, he might even get a little bit better before he gets worse at his age. Because this, as I kind of mentioned earlier, this defense requires a ton of communication, and he's going to take this thing on, and he's going to be a step ahead as far as passing off coverages and coming downhill in cover 4. Like, he could look really good in a split safety defense. It's kind of what he was born to do. So it is kind of sad we don't get to see Harrison Smith in his prime playing a quarters heavy split safety defense. And Zimmer's always, he hasn't shied away from running cover 4, but they're going to run like twice the amount of cover 4 that he's ever consistently ran here. So I do think he's trending down, but do keep an eye on that scheme fit there being a nice boost to Harrison Smith. And then it's going to be probably a bit of a competition at the second safety spot. They'll probably give the nod to their first round pick in Lewis Cine, but you're going to have Cameron Bynum right up against him there. And they will run a lot of 3 safety stuff as well. So you'll see both Cine and Bynum out there with Harrison Smith sometimes. But seeing the one that just has so much athletic upside, I think why not get the jump on his development in this system and get him out there? Because I really think that's what he needs. I was not a huge fan of Lewis Cine as a first round talent. I had him as a late second type of guy. Wasn't really a top 50 player for me in the class though. So I really believe in him, especially with good coaching to like develop. But as far as a day one impact, there was a lot of stuff on his tape that I just was really underwhelmed by. I mean, they basically at Georgia, for the most part, said stay deeper than the deepest, use that deep speed. If the ball gets put in the air, go get it, and come downhill and tackle. And he did that. He played his role fantastic. But in a defense here, where it's going to be a lot of quarters, and he's going to have to dissect route combinations, assess risk, and close distances, converting into man coverage quickly, that was my biggest concern with him, was he was too comfortable leaving a lot of space. Basically, anytime they asked him to play a hook zone or a curl flat or quarters defense, he didn't have that route anticipation and ability to squeeze routes. And you really got to be able to do that in a quarters heavy system. I kind of liked him a little better in like a cover 3, cover 1 heavy system where he can just play free safety, come downhill as a tackler, and show off that range and speed. So they're going to have to coach him up, but all of the athletic ability is there. He's got legit 4.3 speed and a good head on his shoulders. He's a really good tackler coming downhill. But I will say I'm expecting some learning curves in coverage in his rookie season. And because of that, there's a chance that they just feel more comfortable with Cam Bynum, who I love him in this defense. We've talked really countlessly at this point about how many former slot corners there are dominating in these split safety defenses around the league, whether it's Justin Simmons or Micah Hyde or some other good examples out there too. But Cam Bynum was a corner in college. Comes in, plays safety for the Vikings last year, and in a quarters heavy system where you're going to play a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage than, say, a traditional free safety. And you've got to oftentimes pick up a corner route, flip, and get deep and cover a post. All things that cornerbacks are asked to do, not always safeties. So Cam Bynum's going to be very comfortable in that sort of role as someone that converts into man coverage. He's also good coming downhill as a run defender, and I like Cam Bynum too. And I definitely think your long-term duo is here in Lewis Cine and Cam Bynum. But it's just a little bit complicated right now as Bynum and Cine are still developing and Harrison Smith is kind of getting aged out a little bit. But it is a really nice safety room at the end of the day. Metellus, Dorn, Brown, all kind of thumping, probably just special teamers that you're hoping don't really see the field on defense. And that rounds out your pass defense. So the talent's here, right? The pass rush, if they can stay healthy, is absolutely there. You love your linebacking duo, and you've just got some young guys on the defense, really across the board, that need to develop. And then a defensive coaching staff that I think can very much prove themselves. And you can see a route where this becomes a much better defense than it was last year, and maybe a top 15, top 16 defense. I think that sort of potential is in there. But man, there are a lot of question marks, and right now they rank 23rd in overall pass defense. And some of these teams we preview, it's like, that's a worst case scenario. I don't think that's a worst case scenario. I think these injuries could stack up. You could not see the growth you want from the secondary in year one, and you could end up similar to the last couple of years where this is one of the 4 or 5 worst defenses in the league for a variety of reasons. Then your run defense, I think it's a little bit better. I mean, you have 2 really nice defensive tackles up front that are going to hold down the fort. Dalvin Tomlinson, I think he's in the conversation for just like top 10 all around run defending dudes. He's been doing it for years and shouldn't be any different this year. Harrison Phillips had a huge year last year, really took a step up for the Bills. A guy with a wrestling background that is just strong and nasty in the trenches, and not the most athletic guy, not the most highest upside guy, but as a DT2 that is going to be able to play a clear-cut role as a run defender here, with Armin Watts maybe being the pass rush defensive tackle. Love that. And you'll see packages for sure with base defense where it's Armin Watts out there, or maybe we get to see James Lynch go back to more of a 3-4 defensive end. Jalen Twyman, probably better fit for that role. Asezi Otomeo, someone that is going to be making a conversion from edge to the interior unit, but was a really good run defender at Minnesota. I think as far as base defense, you do have some decent depth and some upside there with your other defensive end. So I'm certainly not worried about the interior D-line from a run defense perspective, and that alone would probably make this a top 10 D-line run defense. But on the edge, you got to factor in those injuries, and you also got to factor in the fact that Zadarius Smith has low-key been a really bad run defender in his time in Green Bay. I don't know if it's effort or the fact that he is kind of an upright player and offensive linemen just have an easy time getting up and under him, but offensive game planners have actually gone right at Zadarius Smith in his time in Green Bay, and it is closer to a liability than it is a strength on this D-line. And it's not like there's anybody depth-wise that's coming in relief there. I don't like any of these edge players for depth. Danielle Hunter's a really good run defender, but his injury stuff is definitely concerning. And how much effort is he going to put it on the line, risking getting hurt when he wants that contract? If he knows what's going to get him paid is balling out on third down. So I still like Danielle Hunter, but he's also kind of a question mark on the edge there. So it I think knocks them out of the top 10 for D-line run defense, especially a division that you're facing 2 wide zone run games 4 times a year, like Packers and Bears, and half the league runs wide zone blocking, if not more now. It's becoming more and more important to have defensive ends that can hold down the fort just as much as the interior guys. So something to keep note of. Then the linebackers, definitely a better group in coverage than run defense. I don't think they suck, but Eric Kendricks, that's always been the thing that kind of keeps him from the elite of the elite linebacker conversation. If anything keeps him from that conversation, he does get hurt. He is a more slender guy. He has missed some tackles over the last few years. He's just had his ups and downs from a tackling perspective, but yeah, he does what he can in run defense. He doesn't have any problem dissecting runs or getting physical or anything like that, but just physically speaking, he's not Micah Parsons, Devin White. He can't out-muscle a ton of offensive linemen. Likewise for Jordan Hicks, just kind of a diminished version of Eric Kendricks, though a more consistent tackler there, Jordan Hicks. The linebacker depth, really the 3 guys that I see getting on the field, Asamoah, Lynch, and Dye, are all kind of undersized dudes that I would not expect much in run defense at all. So you're hoping your top 2 guys can stay healthy for sure. And then from the secondary, it's a pretty good group. I mean, Harrison Smith's still one of the best run defending defensive backs in the league. They use him everywhere and will use him everywhere. In this system, he's going to be coming downhill from a quarters alignment a lot, where he'll trigger and pop you. He's more pissed off than a Lamar Jackson Twitter rant coming downhill. So love what you have in Harrison Smith. Shannon Sullivan in the slot plays physical, but is physically limited. I would just say he's fine. You've got Cam Dantzler is uniquely gifted as a run defender, actually, because he's so lanky and he plays really physical. He'll get, bodied up sometimes by receivers with the length and strength to just outclass him, but, he will kind of dance around. Ironic, last name Dantzler. But he'll use that length to just kind of distance himself, and it makes him a pretty good run defender from the edge. And then Pat Peterson does what he can when he wants to, I suppose. He's got the physical ability to be a run defender. And then Lewis Seen is a really consistent tackler. I mean, he's going to be a special teams demon while he develops here if he's not starting, which, again, I think he does start. But Anyway, his run and chase ability is phenomenal, but was not really asked to play from the box, take on a lot of blocks, and that's not really his game. And he's in a good system to kind of protect him from some of that. He's not going to be asked to really play a lot of box safety here. Cam Bynum as well, pretty good tackler, played really nice run defense for the Vikings as a rookie last year. And then you got all your depth. I would just say I wouldn't be terribly worried if any of these guys came in, but no one that stands out as a strength in relief as far as run defense goes, other than Andrew Booth, who's I think going to be a pretty good run defender up and down the sidelines. Overall, you get the 18th best run defense. I think it makes sense. You're really good up the middle, and then you've got just kind of adequate players mostly across the board with the exception of Harrison Smith coming downhill, and a defensive coaching staff that does rank towards the bottom of the league because it's unproven. That if this coaching staff is really clicking and gets these guys to kind of play off each other and builds that chemistry quickly, you could see this being a more of a top half run defense in the league. But overall, you end up with the 21st ranked defense, and I would say most certainly a defense with a high volatility outcome here. I can see them being a bottom 5 defense if the injuries stack up and this staff doesn't put it all together in year one. And I can see them, if they manage to stay healthy and their rookies hit and this defensive staff is really good, you can see this being a top half defense in the league. So definitely a tough defense to project. And as we move forward, it's going to make predicting this team's schedule pretty difficult as well. I will say they rank 23rd in special teams. It's always been kind of frustrating for the Vikings. Their kicking situation especially, they just can't quite seem to consistently have a good kicker ever since Ryan Longwell retired. Carlson's been pretty good for them. Did cost them the Cardinals game last year. Like, he's not perfect. New staff coming in here, a lot of new players. So special teams is high variance. I don't think they're going to suck there, but I don't think they have some great special teams either. They rank 23rd. But let's wrap up with the schedule and my win projection for this team before we bring in Arif. And their Vegas over-under is actually 9 wins. So Vegas definitely thinks they're, kind of in this territory. They're ranked 20th, so kind of on the fringe looking in type of deal for a playoff spot. Certainly capable of making the playoffs, I think. That's pretty clear. I look at their schedule, and they get a pretty nice draw here. Their division's not too bad. You get 4 games with Chicago and Detroit, who I think they're pretty clearly better than. And then Green Bay at home week 1 is a pretty nice draw because Rodgers is going to need some time to develop some chemistry with these new receivers. Maybe no David Bakhtiari early in the year. Maybe you do have your edge rushers healthy week 1. Like, that's a nice draw to get Green Bay week 1, which is normally going to be one of your harder games. I definitely think that's winnable. I don't know if they're for sure going to win, but would not be the least bit surprised if they took down Green Bay week 1. And then you get the AFC East and the NFC East, which are far from the best divisions in the league. So I think just the NFC North in general has got a pretty nice schedule. We said the same thing about Detroit, who we picked the over on. I do say no bet here because the range of outcomes with this team are just way too crazy, and you don't have a quarterback that's going to carry everything. But if you feel better, I would say, about the defensive staff kind of making this defense look really good this year, and you feel better about those edge rushers staying healthy, I certainly wouldn't tell you not to bet this. Like, I'm just going to stay away because I think there's only good reason to make like 2 or 3 over-under bets on the year, and I don't think this is really convincing one way or another. But again, I think the Vikes are definitely in contention for the playoffs. Maybe not the division, but certainly 6 seed, 7 seed is going to be in play for the Vikes, and a lot of kind of 50-50 games on the schedule. And it's going to be an interesting first year in the Kevin O'Connell era where they're kind of doing this competitive rebuild type of deal. Excited to watch this team, straight up. So that is going to do it from just me. We're going to bring in Arif, and let's get into it. And now I am thrilled to welcome into the deep dive my good friend Arif Hasan, writer, podcaster for The Athletic, also the creator of the Athletic Big Board, which thanks again, by the way, for including me in that bad boy this year. How's it going, man? Thanks for taking the time. Come on, talk some Vikes.
Yeah, man, I'm good. No, it's always good to have a board that's like bigger than just 150 players. I'm always excited to be able to add, somebody who's done a little bit more work in getting into, players 150 to 200 to 250. So, happy to have you in there. And yeah, man, I'm good. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Just got back from a 3 week Euro trip bender, so it's been a little tough to get
Very-
back in the rhythm of things after
Yeah.
living large like that. But it's good to be back. Never hurts to come back to a nice Minnesota summer like we have here. So
hmm
yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, you
So
missed probably the biggest heat wave. So, you picked the perfect time to come back.
yeah, well, it was like hundreds in Italy too. So
Oh, okay. Well, never mind. Yeah, screwed
yeah,
either way.
um, or 35 Celsius as they call it out there.
Whatever crazy numbers they use. Yeah.
Got to keep it culturally accurate here.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk some Vikes. So, obviously, a new staff coming in here. They're kind of doing the Rams thing, the young offensive mind, bringing in an O'Connell. I'm never gonna not get this. I'm never gonna get this right because I've always had Pat, the punter for the Bears, Pat
Right.
O'Donnell. Now
Yeah.
Kevin O'Connell. It's just I'm always gonna get those two guys mixed up.
Just
But
call him
I'm
KOC.
just
I think you'll be fine.
okay. I like that. I like
Yeah.
that. And Quessy coming in as the new GM. So I'm just curious, as someone that's close to the team. I don't know if you've spent any time out at OTAs or anything like that, but I'm just curious. What are some of the refreshing differences that you've either noticed already or kind of expect to notice, whether that's the coaching staff or with the GM and the front office?
Yeah. No, I have been able to get out there for OTAs and minicamp and stuff like that. One thing, there's some like cosmetic differences that I think signal something, a little bit bigger in terms of the way the team conducts itself. So, for example, they have, a video board up there with the last rep on it. And so, you perform a rep. And then, say you're on the first team, you perform a rep, you take a seat back and allow, the second to perform the rep, you turn to your left, and there's the rep you just watched or that you just performed, and you can watch it now, right? Which is cool. It's like the small thing, right? But it allows you to kind of, review things, see if you made any mistakes kind of in real time and correct it by the time you get around to your next rep. And, if that was the only difference, I wouldn't mention it. But it seems like there's, all kinds of kind of small things that are building up in terms of ways to, allow players to hold themselves accountable as opposed to just having top down accountability. Encourage an environment where, mistakes should be revealed, right? As opposed to, you want to hide your mistakes to avoid getting punished or something along those lines, and corrected and stuff like that. And it very much seems like there's an atmosphere of open communication. And these things all sound great in the off season. I can say the words collaboration, till the cows come home, but it very much seems like that is the culture that they're establishing. Now, whether or not that culture lasts into, if they start off the season with 4 straight losses, who knows? But um, for now, it very much seems like there is a much more kind of open and dynamic culture. And it seems like a pallor has been lifted off the team. I think that might actually just be the biggest thing. Is I think entering into last season and especially the second half of last season, there was just kind of this like depressing atmosphere around the building. Everyone knew the coaching staff was gone. Nobody knew what their jobs were going to be long term. And now you've got kind of a new coaching staff. People are a lot more excited to be there. So there's changes like, hey, they're moving to three wide receiver sets a lot more often. Last year the Vikings were last in the league in three receiver sets, which was only rivaled by the year before, where they somehow were even lower in total usage of three wide receiver sets. That's going to be we're going to see that a lot more. There seems to be much more creative usage of the personnel that they have. Dalvin Cook lining up out wide is something that they're going to be interested in. I'm kind of curious about how they're going to use CJ Ham because they know they don't have a second tight end. They might want to use their fullback that way, kind of like we see with Juszczyk in San Francisco. And so we're going to see some of the stuff that people are excited to talk about from an X and O's perspective, but also like layered on top of that is kind of this shift in the way that people kind of conduct themselves around the building.
So my only takeaway from that is that you're expecting them to start 0-4. No, that's really some good insight, man. Like that's all the kind of stuff that I think everybody was expecting to kind of happen. I love that video board thing. Like that's exactly the kind of thing Mike Zimmer wouldn't have, and exactly the kind of thing a modern
Right,
thing
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
team would have. So yeah, really cool. I want to talk now a little bit more about some of these carryover veterans, if you will. So when I look at this team, health is going to be such a big deal for some of these key star players, more so
Mhm.
I think than a lot of these teams,
Yeah.
at least that I've been kind of previewing in this series so far. So Adam Thielen, Daniil Hunter, and now Zadarius Smith, to me, all are going to come in with that big like medical red check as they come into the year. So I'm just curious. Obviously, you can't predict injuries, but um, do you think it's a legitimate knock on this team to basically maybe not expect full snap counts from those guys, or are you more optimistic than that?
No, I think it's a legitimate concern, and I think actually you'd be comfortable or justified in throwing in, Patrick Peterson and Eric Kendricks too. Peterson just because of his age, he doesn't have like a history of missing a ton of games for health related reasons. But Eric Kendricks has I think missed more games than people realize over the last 2 seasons, and that's something to kind of be aware of. Um, I looked into kind of the medical history and how that kind of translates going forward, specifically for Zadarius Smith and Daniil Hunter, who I mean, you'd be so justified in thinking that they've got, a lot of precarity in terms of their ability to play, like, say, 1,000 snaps or something along those lines. And the research suggests to me it's not an enormous concern. The types of injuries that they've sustained are not injuries that lead to kind of future fragility, as it were. It's not like they broke their femur or something along those lines, or a groin
Hmm.
injury that tends to impact your movement skills throughout the rest of your body. They tend to be the types of injuries that don't impact, anterior muscles or anything like that, and don't impact kind of your future incidents of injury at that specific body part. So, from that perspective, you could say that there's not a huge reason to be worried if you take a look at stuff like Injury Predictor, or you take a look at some of the papers that have been written about those injuries. They all seem to think that there's actually a really low chance that they'll miss a lot of games, but um, you know, that's nice having all the data. I'm a huge egghead, right? Like I follow the data, but the back of my mind, I'm always just feeling like, yeah, I don't know. Right? Like,
Yeah,
there's just in the back of your mind. And so I think that there's something there. And I think the bigger issue even then is the places where the Vikings, you would argue maybe they're most fragile injury wise, are also the places where you're not confident in their depth, right? Like that edge rusher group is just not very unless we see like a huge jump in development from say Patrick Jones or DJ Wanham, and I'm not expecting that for Wanham. Or Janarius Robinson missed the entire season last year. If there's something there, but he's like a fifth round pick, right? You can't just bank on that, right?
right.
And so without that, I just don't think that there's a lot of opportunity to create pressure if those two aren't healthy. And so it's both the fact that you've got players that are somewhat injury prone, or you've got a reasonable understanding that they could be, and that there's not depth at those positions that might be kind of the pivot point for that team.
Yeah, it's definitely a point of worry for me, especially obviously Packer fan here. Shouldn't have disclosed that for any
Yeah,
Vikings
right,
fans
right.
joining here, but I
They
we'll
were
wait a couple
fooled
years
by
with.
your Minnesota Twins shirt.
Hey,
You lured them in.
recording this right in Minneapolis, so in enemy territory. But Zadarius, even before the big injury that took him out all of last year, played 2 games, I think,
Mhm.
before trying to sneak back in before the playoff push. But he was always like one of those players that was grabbing his knee one play, his hamstring the next, and sometimes he'd come back in, sometimes he missed the rest of the game, and then you get the big back injury. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose, on that. You mentioned Eric Kendricks a little bit. That is my next question. I'm curious kind of where we're at with Eric Kendricks. I know we talked about him last year, and I think it was in the Vikings deep dive where I made the argument that he might be the most valuable linebacker in the league because of how good he is at taking away the middle of the field. I don't think I believe that at this point in time, but
Not that Michael
um,
Parsons exists. I don't know that you
yeah,
can.
seriously, man. and now that Darius Leonard is a
Right.
peanut punching machine. But yeah, where are you at with Kendricks? Do you still see him in kind of that top tier, or even like a top 5 linebacker, or have you kind of faded on him a little bit?
It's kind of interesting. I feel like linebackers in general are a position where, if you don't maintain that level of prominence for at least a short period of time, you drop out really quickly. Like, if you take a look at that ESPN list of the top 10 linebackers as determined by like 50 executives, I think that was the idea, right? Fred Warner, I think, has dropped out of the top 3, right? Which you wouldn't have imagined 2 years ago. Eric Hendricks
Yeah.
is an honorable mention. Demario Davis isn't. I don't think anywhere on the list, if I remember correctly. And 3 years ago, all 3 of those guys would have been top 3 guys, right? 2 years ago, maybe. And it's been replaced by a new top of the list. Darius Leonard has moved back up into the top of the list, right? But um, that is a position where it's very easy to kind of lose sight of kind of who's at the top, who's the most valuable, and who is contributing the most to their team, even if the level of play hasn't changed too much. And so I personally, I think that Eric Hendricks is still up there, right? I think that, it's kind of weird that he was only an honorable mention, but not a top 10 player. But, those players that were above him were all very good. I don't think that there was anybody there where I was kind of offended to see them, right? And so
Devin White.
Okay, actually, no, you're right. That one, fair enough.
There's one.
Not even the best one on his team, but
Yes.
but he's such a good leader, right?
Mm.
That's the. But
So was Blake Martinez.
He turned into a pretty good linebacker in New York. Let's
Once
give
he
him his
left.
flowers. But once he left, but I think that for the most part, Eric Hendricks is still very similar to the linebacker he was when he earned top 3 consideration or top level consideration as an off ball guy. He's really remarkable, like you mentioned, in coverage. His ability to take away the middle of the field, and I think that honestly, he was kind of always a little bit built for the type of defense that the Vikings seem to be running now, one that protects the linebackers a little bit more, which is why Mike Zimmer kind of went out of his way the last couple of years to find guys who are not pass rushers up front, but run stuffers at both defensive tackle positions, which is very unusual, but it did clear the way for Eric Hendricks to do some of the stuff that he did. And now that you're in a defense that is kind of designed around, protecting linebackers a little bit more in the run game, and then taking that protection away by lightening the box. It's very unusual, but kind of designed around that idea. I think that we're going to see a little bit more in terms of, his ability to produce near the line of scrimmage as a run defender too. And I thought he was always a good one, but that was obviously, if you're going to compare his two skill sets, coverage was always a strength.
Yeah.
This, I think, helps even in that capacity as a run defender. Still going to be a great coverage player. I expect a couple of turnovers through the air, but I mean, I wouldn't say that he's like getting older, but he's past his prime, if that makes sense. Like I wouldn't expect him to decline, but I don't expect him to keep improving either. And so I still think that he's a top level linebacker. If he gets hurt, that's going to impact the defense enormously, especially without Anthony Barr there. So I think that Kendricks is still probably one of the keys to the defense. If he goes down, that's kind of it for the defense.
Excuse me, trying to
kill
a bug
there?
flying in front of my face. I agree. I think it's just a combination of a little bit of size, a little bit of age regression, a little bit of injury stuff that is just maybe a little bit of, I don't know, residue on his resume, I suppose. But
sure.
I want to talk about the right guard spot because and I know it's a tough question, and it's actually pretty crazy the options they have, and none of them are any thing you're too excited about. But I look at 5 guys that I think could potentially be playing right guard for the Vikings week 1 right now. And I don't know where this came from, but I saw Jesse Davis listed at right guard, so maybe that's something they're playing around with right now. You obviously have a couple of young guys that haven't played. You got Wyatt Davis and Ed Ingram, who they spent a 2nd round pick on, Udo, who started every game there last year, and Chris Reed, who I think should be in consideration after how he played for the Colts last year. So who's been at right guard in early camps, and who do you think wins the right guard spot?
So I can knock 2 of those players out of consideration pretty quickly. They've moved Oli Udo back to tackle. They've basically said he is a tackle, and he's going to be probably the primary swing tackle as a backup, so right tackle, left tackle. So there's that, which helps resolve another question that they have in terms of depth. Also, it very much seems like Wyatt Davis is just on the outs. Like it sucks. It's his 2nd year. He's a 3rd round pick. You'd expect that he'd be in contention for this kind of job, but he really isn't. He hasn't been. He's been primarily actually on the 3rd team in reps. He has rotated in on the 2nd team on occasion. When Austin Schlottman was injured and Chris Reed moved to center, they moved Wyatt Davis up to, that kind of stuff, right? But it's primarily between Chris Reed, Jesse Davis, and Ed Ingram. And I feel like Chris Reed is actually kind of losing out in that three-way battle. I think that he has had less opportunity to be kind of playing first team right guard. I think that they really like him as the stud interior backup that can play all three positions, but I don't think that they see him as a guy that's going to start there. Jesse Davis is interesting. Last 2 years he primarily played a tackle for Miami, but before that he played guard. Um, you know, when the signing happened, Miami fans were telling Vikings fans, hey, watch out, this guy's not very good. And Vikings fans are like, well, is that a
He was their
tackle or
best
that?
lineman last year.
It might be Robert Hunt, but yes, yeah.
Yes, that's true.
But yeah, no, I'm with you there. But the Vikings fans' response has been like, well, that was at tackle. He's going to play guard. He's played well at guard. And yeah, he's played better at guard for Miami. I don't know that he's played well.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Reed, I think, has played much better than you'd expect a backup to play, which is, I think, why Colts fans liked him so much. But this is his fifth team, I think, for a reason. So, there's, kind of a little bit back and forth. And then Ed Ingram, I thought, setting the off-field stuff aside for him, just putting it to the side, I don't think he should have been a second-round pick, right? Like, I just didn't see that level of
Totally
quality
agree.
from him. He was the best offensive lineman LSU had last year, right? But that's not enough. So they're, I think, in a really tough spot there. The thing is, the level of play they got from right guard last year, I think no matter what happens, they'll end up with an upgrade, right? So from that perspective, the Vikings have improved at right guard. I just don't know if they're going to get kind of a starting quality guy. If I think they're lucky with Jesse Davis, who I expect to win the competition at this point. Would not be shocked if it was Ed Ingram, but my expectation is that it's Jesse Davis. They're going to get probably below average play, which again, huge upgrade over what they had last year. But I don't know that they're going to get an acceptable solution at right guard.
Okay. Yeah, it's a bummer.
Yeah, it's a tough position to talk about for Vikings.
Yeah. All right. Well, my next one's a little bit more fun. You get to pick one player to break out this year. Who do you think? You're betting on a player to break out this year.
Betting? Okay, so I'm betting.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not like the optimal player to break out. It's
no.
Who, okay.
It can be the long snapper if you really want.
Man. I don't know if Christian Darrisaw counts as a breakout, right? He had a pretty good chunk of games when he was finally healthy and was able to play. But I think that's the guy I'm kind of more confident in as a breakout.
I accept that.
Yeah. Okay.
I kind of go from like mauling guy that struggled in pass pro last year a little bit to more of like
exactly.
Right, he's entering top half of the league, left tackle.
Yeah, because his pass pro was primarily built on his ability to recover, which is more impressive than I anticipated, in all honesty. But he does have the baseline athleticism, and now that he's healthy and has the ability to actually do technical training in the offseason, I think that he's got that opportunity. So I guess I'm going to pick Christian Darrisaw. Were I to not have picked Christian Darrisaw, I think on offense, my only opportunity, I think, from there would have been Irv Smith, which is like kind of a boring. Everybody in fantasy has been predicting him to break out, and there's no other tight ends on the roster. But I'm going to pick Christian Darrisaw on offense, and then defense. I don't know that there is like a super amazing breakout candidate.
Sure.
Yeah.
How has the Kellen Mond project been looking in year two? Still
not
nothing.
Great. Yeah, not great. There's obviously not a lot to go on here. The fact that the Vikings have primarily had Sean Mannion as the second quarterback and Kellen Mond as the third quarterback, it's a little alarming, but also it's kind of a product of the fact that their fourth quarterback was injured, and so they needed someone to take the reps of the third team, and which then meant that you couldn't have a rotation on the second team. And so it just so happened that Kellen Mond was probably a better fit for those third team reps. So that's part of it, right? But also, like, I don't know that I've seen anything from him that would demonstrate that he's, made a substantial improvement over last year where, it wasn't just Mike Zimmer being a hater. I mean, he legitimately was just like not very good in camp or in the 3 snaps he took.
He came in for like a drive, right? And then tried to throw a
pick.
He
threw a pick six where not for a drop. Yeah. It was,
yeah.
It was
was that his only snaps?
Yeah, those were his only snaps all season, and they were pretty bad. Yeah, and in practices and in training camp, I mean, he was just not a very good player. Apparently COVID hit him pretty hard that offseason. That was the reason he missed snaps at the beginning of camp, and he lost some weight, and so all of that, plays a
Hmm.
role, right? And maybe, but we haven't seen anything yet, and mind you, we haven't seen it. There's just not been a ton in terms of practices, so he could still kind of turn into an interesting, viable quarterback two candidate. It's just the evidence is just not there yet, which is not the same
Yeah.
thing as the evidence being there for him not turning out. If that
So
makes
have they
sense.
had still Sean Mannion as QB2? Is that
Primarily, but again,
unclear?
I think
Yeah.
that has to do with injury to Nate Stanley.
Okay.
Like
I
I think they would have rotated Kellen Mond in more often were it not for that.
I see. Okay. Last thing I want to talk to you about is the draft and kind of just what were your overall thoughts on it. I definitely was underwhelmed by kind of what they got with the two trade downs, and I'm curious what you thought of all that.
In terms of pure pick for position, if we don't look at the trades, right? If we just look at, let's say they had the 32nd pick, they had, whatever pick that they picked it. I thought they got good value for those players, right? I thought that they picked the right players. I think that you're right, especially that first trade down was not really remarkable. Um, in terms of like the analytics trades, whatever, and that looks good, but you're betting against the market, right? Like, yeah, it was better to trade than not, but it is weird that you got this return versus all the returns that all these other trade downs have gotten, even when they don't involve a quarterback. So I didn't love the way that they approached the strategy there, and I think that they just kind of signaled to the rest of the league that they're willing to take less when they trade down in the future, and so it's just going to be really difficult for them to negotiate really opportune trades for them. So that was an issue there, but I really like Lewis Seen. I thought he was my second safety, so grabbing him at 32, I thought was really good. Um, but safety was not an enormous need. I was pretty high on Cameron Bynum. I think that he's a really good player, and so Xavier Woods leaving, we expect Cameron Bynum to be the starter, and so the upgrade there is a little bit marginal. I anticipate that they'll put three safeties on the field a little bit more often too,
Yeah.
so there is some arbitrage opportunity there that you don't have to worry that much about replacing. And then Andrew Booth, I thought was a really great pick. Obviously, you have to worry about that injury situation a lot, but I thought he was a great pick. From there, I don't know that I loved the picks. I mean, I guess I kind of like a Caleb Evans in the fourth round. Did not like
Hmm.
Ed Ingram. I already mentioned that in the second round. And then even the late round picks, I was just like, like Jalen Naylor didn't really move the needle for me. They seem pretty excited about him, so I can't wait to be wrong about that. But Vidaria Lowe, I thought was that's an undrafted guy to me. Drafting him in the sixth round, I thought was a little bit rich, but they nailed the most important picks to me, which is the most important thing you can do. Like getting a bunch of really great value in the final round of the draft is a nice bonus, but it does not make up for screwing up the first couple of picks. And here they did the opposite. They nailed the first couple of picks, and that's where most of your value comes from.
The one that made no sense to me was the Oklahoma linebacker that his name's escaping me
Oh,
right
Brian
now.
Asamoah. Yeah, I didn't. Especially if you're a two linebacker team, which I mean every team is, but like in a 3-4, you're just not going to carry that many interior
Yeah.
linebackers. That probably signals the end of Chaz Surratt, who they drafted last year.
Mm.
Because I don't think that Surratt is better than the undrafted guy they got, Blake Lynch, from a year and a half ago, who's played above him, or even Troy Dye, who's just not very good, but he's a fourth round guy from a couple of
Sure.
years ago as well. So yeah, they already had a bunch of linebackers that you could justify having on the depth chart. Grabbing Brian S. The thing is, he fits the mold of all of those Vic Fangio mid to late round linebackers. That if it's not Roquan Smith, it's like Corey Littleton or
Hmm.
the guy who was like basically the defensive player of the game of the Super Bowl, whose name escapes me now, like Ernest Jones, I think.
Oh
Something like
yeah.
that. Yeah, I think he
Yeah.
was an undrafted or fifth round or something like that guy. But those guys, he fits the mold of those guys that just kind of they're super lightweight. They run sideline to
Move well in
sideline.
space and
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah.
but the problem for me is that he's a run defending small linebacker. He's actually not very good in coverage. Like his speed is fantastic. You'd think that those translate into coverage, but he's not a coverage guy. He's really good against the run, and I don't know that that's a skill that's going to translate for him at the next level.
Yeah. I thought he was just like a base weak side backer and a special teamer. So
Yeah,
I
I think he's going to be a phenomenal special teamer. I don't know if I'm
yeah.
picking that in the third round.
It man, I look at because they ended up getting the Ed Ingram and Asamoah for the Packers trade down, right?
Yeah.
Or did they
It-
get or
no,
did
they
they
got
get
they got they got Andrew Booth, right? Because that was what the pick was for, right? They
okay.
got Andrew Booth, and then
Yeah.
I think the pick they picked up was the Ed Ingram pick. It has been a bit,
You're
um,
totally right. Yep. Yep.
but
because it was the 2 seconds.
That was a trade where if you look at the assets that before the picks came in, the Vikings absolutely won. And then you look at who they picked up, and you're a little bit kind of more skeptical. I'm a big Christian Watson hater, obviously, but NDSU guy, I can't. But you know, I don't know that Ed Ingram and Ryan Asimo and all that were remarkable values.
Okay, well, we'll see how it all plays out. That's all I got for you, man. Anything you got going on that you want to talk about here before we get out of here?
Yeah, sure. If you want my thoughts on a non-Vikings player, I published a pretty big piece on Tua Tagovailoa over at The Athletic. You can check that out. Otherwise, Chad Graff and I did kind of the 5 biggest questions surrounding the Vikings. That's also at The Athletic. You can check that out. Both of them you'll find on my page, theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hasan.
Awesome. And everyone make sure you follow him as well. Great follow on Twitter, whether you're a Vikings fan or not. So
appreciate it.
And make sure you talk crap about him also being a Seahawks fan. He loves that.
Not a Seahawks fan.
All right, my man. I still owe you a drink one of these days, but
yeah,
thanks for coming on.
Yeah, sooner rather than later, at least, hopefully.
Yeah, let's make it happen. Dope. All right. And that is all we got. Thanks again to Arif for coming on and blessing us with his knowledge and insight. And thank you to you guys, the viewers, for sticking it out. I know these videos are long. If you are still here, if you could do me a huge favor, please do hit that like button if you haven't already. Make a couple burner accounts, hit it a couple more times. I don't know, just an idea. But we'll see you in a few more days for our next deep dive. Thank you for watching. Peace out.